Florida Governor and potential 2024 presidential nominee Ron DeSantis is facing backlash, but not just from Democrats, instead from within his own party. This comes after the Republican characterized Russia's war in Ukraine as a territorial dispute between two countries.
Here to discuss, Alyssa Farah-Griffin, a CNN political commentator and former Trump White House communications director, and Ron Brownstein, a CNN senior political analyst and the senior editor at The Atlantic. We're hearing from more Republicans who just disagree with, I'd say, 2023 Ron DeSantis, because 2015 Ron DeSantis said something very different. Let's listen, courtesy of the K-File, a radio interview.
We in the Congress have been urging the president, I've been, to provide arms to Ukraine. Right. They want to fight their good fight. They're not asking us to fight it for them, and the president has steadfastly refused. And I think that that's a mistake.
So that's 8 years ago. Why the flip?
Well, I think this was a terrible political miscalculation by Governor DeSantis, and I call it a political calculation because it was precisely that. As recently as you said, in 2015, after the invasion of Crimea, he was in favor of arming Ukraine to the teeth and criticizing the Obama administration for not doing more. This was clearly an effort to cater to the MAGA anti-interventionist wing of the GOP. But what I think he's going to be surprised to learn is that's a vast minority within the Republican Party. The language that I think really resonates in a negative way with Republicans like myself is to say this is a territorial dispute. That language undermines and calls into question the sovereignty of Ukraine, a sovereign nation that was, of course, invaded by Russia. So I think this was one of the first times that he's actually gone a bit too far, even with regard to the mainstream of the Republican Party, and they're realizing that now.
And yet, Ron, the two front runners for the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, also his views and comments on Vladimir Putin and the war aren't that different from what we're hearing from Ron DeSantis. So it's all reassuring to hear from Republicans now who are disagreeing with that and who are supporting Ukraine's defense and the United States in support of Ukraine for that defense itself. But if they become the nominee, wouldn't you imagine all of that changes? How would they rally around a candidate whose views they differ on foreign policy like this?
Point out, I mean, these are the two candidates who in polls will have something like 3/4 of the total vote in a Republican primary, both taking this position that is at odds with the really post-1952 Dwight Eisenhower beating Robert Taft Republican Party. I agree with most of what Alyssa said. I differ in one extent. I mean, I think this is clearly an example of Donald Trump being in Ron DeSantis's head. And as I've said to you before, I think the core of the DeSantis strategy is to offer Republican voters Trumpism without Trump, to basically say, I will be as fierce a cultural warrior as Trump is against all the targets that you want to smite, but I don't carry all the personal baggage of Trump. And I think as part of that, he is very determined not to let Trump establish a lot of daylight on many of these issues that have enormous appeal to the MAGA base of the party. The risk, of course, is that by doing that, you're creating dissonance both with another piece of the Republican Party, as she mentioned, and even maybe more fundamentally, if you win the nomination, I can't imagine that Joe Biden would be worried about going into a general election, basically standing up as the defender of the Western alliance to rebuff Vladimir Putin against an opponent who is calling this a territorial dispute.
Alyssa, before we get to the nomination, do you think that this language, this position from DeSantis is enough to alienate some of those never Trump or Trump reluctant Republicans who were looking for a strong alternative?
I think it's significant enough in the context of history of the moment that he's going to have to clean it up. A voter like myself, I will not support someone who's not going to support continuing aid to Ukraine. And a point that Governor DeSantis makes is essentially China is the biggest U.S. adversary right now. I don't dispute that, but he argues that we cannot kind of walk and chew gum and support our Ukrainian allies while also countering China. I disagree with that outright. I think most, strong pro-national defense Republicans think that we can do both of those, and that, frankly, a victorious Vladimir Putin is a boon to China. I think he's going to have to clarify this at some point. I don't imagine he will sometime soon, but before it gets closer and closer to a nomination, and if he were to get the nomination.
So, Ron, a two-pronged question. How many Republicans agree with Alyssa's view here? And in general, historically, when you're talking about a general election, how much of a priority is foreign policy, especially when it's not the United States directly at war?
So first question, generally, Still, a majority of Republicans say they support aid to Ukraine, but that number is steadily declining. And I'm guessing if there are polls, more recent polls than what we've seen earlier this year in January or so, we might be at majority opposition because they are getting such a clear cue from these party leader figures. It is a big divide in the Republican Party. And you've seen that in the way in which people like Chris Christie have explicitly compared what DeSantis said to appeasement by Neville Chamberlain of Adolf Hitler before World War II. I mean, that's a really explosive word to put into an intra-party debate. And as I say, in many ways, this echoes the debate Republicans had 7 decades ago between Dwight Eisenhower and Robert Taft about whether the focus should be defending Europe against Russia or an Asia-first foreign policy, which DeSantis is kind of going toward as well. I don't think foreign policy historically has been the central fulcrum of presidential elections, except when we are actively at war. But it goes into the overall equation of whether you believe, A, someone is up to the job, and B, what is the real fault line now, whether someone shares your values. And I look at DeSantis doing this in the context of him also pushing likely for a 6-week abortion ban, for permitless gun carry in Florida. And he's taking a lot of steps. He could be a formidable candidate to help Republicans regain some of those white collar suburbs they've lost in the Trump era. But he is taking a lot of steps that could come back to haunt him with those voters if he's the nominee.